Hi, I'm Pastor Bill Brannan. I'm with the Liberty Hill Voters Association. Our goal is to develop a conversation within the city about different things that affect the citizens, hoping to get more and more people involved in local government and to help develop a flourishing city. I'm here today with John Branigan, and we're going to begin by talking about the dark skies. So, John, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm John Branigan. Lived in Liberty Hill for 49 years. Proud Panther graduate. So let's get started.
Good. Well, first, tell me about your thoughts about the dark skies ordinances.
I think they're not providing the type of positive change that we need for the city. I think we can work on something amongst just the citizens to keep everyone content and happy that benefits the businesses and the residents at the same time without creating a bunch of undue regulation that we all have to try to follow.
Yes, well, I saw you speaking at the city council meeting, and I was really impressed with some of the things that you said. And before we get into more specifics and dig in detail, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is really important for Liberty Hill and really for America to think about is what you mentioned about your mom, Liz Branigan, who, in my opinion, was an incredible mayor, brought incredible blessings to the city of Liberty Hill, helped bring things in order. And one of the first things you said was you love her, but on this you disagree, but you still love her. Getting that kind of ability to disagree, but yet still have love and respect for one another, I think is kind of the context that we want to have these conversations. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all individuals. Some of us are individuals who just want to live in our homes, content, and raise our children. We moved to this community because we love the values, the remoteness of it. You know, it's not in a big city yet, and we should all respect each other. My perspective with my mom is very unique because we have a deep love for each other, obviously, but we don't agree on a lot of stuff. So we have very spirited conversations about lots of things, and that's good. That's good to have because then I get to learn her side of perspectives and she gets to learn mine, and we come together on some things where we tend to agree where we didn't necessarily think we would, and that's important for the community because we have so many diverse personalities here, backgrounds. Liberty Hill was a very small, poor community when I grew up here, and it's not that anymore. And we need to change with the times, and part of that is figuring out how we can all work together to achieve the same benefits, the same desires for living in a great community and being able to raise our children, and still have each individual's goals and perspectives recognized and appreciated.
Yeah. Well, something else you said that I'd love you to talk more about is that as you keep growing older, you start to have a greater love for some of our founding principles in this nation, and you connected that to the dark skies ordinances. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm a very strong property rights proponent. I believe that we are all given gifts by God, and that we should all be able to utilize those gifts to our own abilities and own desires. I feel like we should be able to utilize our own land the way that we want and be able to enjoy it in our own passions. And just because we don't necessarily agree on how governmental rules and regulations should affect our properties, I still feel like it's your property, it's my property, and we should still work together and make sure our government respects both of our opinions on it.
Yes. Now, expanding that a little bit, I noticed that the dark skies ordinances, for example, are being extended to the ETJ. And I believe you're in the ETJ, correct?
Currently we are in the ETJ.
Right. So, from my understanding, everybody who lives in the ETJ, their homes are going to be subject to these dark sky ordinances that include items like if your light bulb can be seen physically outside, it's out of ordinance. If light goes beyond the borders of your property, it's out of ordinance. I believe there's even maximum amounts of lumens you're allowed, and if you want to do anything on your property, you have to submit a plan to the city with all the current lighting that's there, the new lighting, the location, the height, the brand of the fixture, the brand of the light bulb. And what really I think is interesting is that the people who live in the ETJ are going to be responsible to be in compliance, but they don't have any say in voting for the people that are making these laws for their property. How does that connect to, in your opinion, to founding principles?
Well, it is. It's taxation without representation, essentially. You know, the people that are really complaining about the dark skies have views of the city. Some of them similar to what I have at my own personal house here. We have an elevated view of the city. We can see lights. We can see the glow of Leander. We can see the stoplights and billboards in our vision, but those shouldn't be offensive. You know, if your neighbor is directly shining a spotlight in your window, that's offensive, and I could see where you would be upset about that. But having natural light on your property shouldn't be offensive to anybody. Nobody complains about seeing the glow of the football stadium lights from Texas football on Friday nights, right? Everyone loves that. It makes you feel like you're at home whenever you see that. It's a warm glow, and those lights turn off after the football game and the football players go home, and it's dark all over again. And so I think it's a very fine line of making sure that our businesses get the support that they need to be able to continue their business and get their businesses to grow, and have the residents happy. And I think sometimes the residents get upset about things that probably they shouldn't. And you know, as it relates to the founding principles of this nation, the older I get, I find myself saying this all the time, the more libertarian I get, the more I want government out of my life and not in it. We live in an area surrounding Austin, outside of Austin, where we should want to value our own personal and property rights, and still want to keep peace with our neighbors. Just because the government comes in with a new rule or law doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily follow it. But you're absolutely correct. What the City of Liberty Hill is doing right now, and what the rules that they're passing with this dark sky ordinance, and the way it affects the residents in the ETJ that have no voting representation, and the businesses who have no voting representation, is really unfair.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I think about property rights, as you're talking about, and kind of laws and ordinances, you know, I really wrestle with that a lot, because I'm always asking the question, what are the moral bounds of government? You know, when you have laws that really are verifiable, like fire code and safety code, to impose on the citizens, it is restricting what they can do on their property, but it's morally justified. And yet when you're a politician, I think that you have to really wrestle with the weight of making an ordinance that restricts people's property values to make sure that the benefit outweighs the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also think that a lot of times an idea sounds really good, and, you know, a lot of ideas are great, and it would be wonderful if we could do everything, but we don't often analyze the trade-offs and the costs. And kind of what I'm perceiving here in Liberty Hill is that a lot of people want to maintain the small town feel, the values of Liberty Hill, and I couldn't agree with that more. But I think when we're looking at a growing bureaucracy and growing code structure, that there might be a trade-off in personability and being able to feel like you're in a small town when you have these growing codes. What are your thoughts about that?
So you mentioned something about moral, and that's important, because if we look at our moral and ethical values above laws and codes, and value the intrinsic nature of our fellow human beings and neighbors, right, then we tend to do things that better the whole of the group, right, instead of just nitpicking things that might better a few. And so I think it's very important that we all internally figure out what our moral limitations are and ethical limitations, and strive to reach above those for the betterment of the community.
Absolutely. And when I'm thinking about the kind of the dark skies, they're deeply connected to the sign ordinances in the city limits that a number of the business owners are really concerned about. And one of their concerns has to do with electronic message displays. And what they're saying is that the electronic message displays actually help them to attract sales tax revenue to the city, and that they need to, well, I think many of them are looking to hopefully get their signs grandfathered in a reasonable manner. And of course, I'd like to ask the broader question, if electronic message displays actually help businesses develop sales tax revenue for the city, to me, that's protecting the citizens from property tax increases. Tell me about some of your thoughts about these things.
You're absolutely right. The businesses need to be able to continue to grow. Most of these businesses that we're talking about are small businesses. They're mom and pop owned. They're not big mega corporations. So the community should really get behind supporting those type of businesses. 70% of our business growth in the nation, employment base, is from small businesses. So I think we really need to help support those. The electronic messaging displays have a valuable benefit to those business owners, or they wouldn't spend the enormous amounts of dollars to install and upkeep and maintain those. I think the business owners in the city of Liberty Hill have been very responsive to the dark sky ordinances and the lighting ordinances. They've dimmed their signs. They've all agreed to dim their lights. I think there needs to be a compromise now between the residents who are complaining about this and the business owners, so that the business owners can continue to operate their business and continue to grow and be profitable. And really that benefits the city of Liberty Hill, because it's like chicken and egg. You can't have businesses until you have residents. Well, if the residents are constantly complaining, the businesses won't come in. So they've got to be cohesive and work together.
Absolutely. What would be your thoughts on allowing a certain use of electronic message displays within the city compared to the idea of just grandfathering in the ones that are already there?
So I think offensive is abstract, right? It's arbitrary. It's totally opinionated. What's offensive to you might not be offensive to me. I think there should be a level of allowing electronic message displays or any other type of signage to be instituted by the businesses to their liking, to their desire to continue to grow, yet be respectful of their neighbors, especially the ones that live close to the city limit bounds, the corporate areas. I think it's a fine balance right now, because the city of Liberty Hill is now beginning to grow and flourish and start having more commercial activity. And so there's a lot of residents whose homes are still close to that commercial activity. At some point, they'll probably move away or move a little bit farther out to get away from the commercial construction and the commercial noise and the commercial lighting and everything else that goes with commercial activity. But again, as I said, they go hand in hand. So I think the businesses need to be able to utilize any signage, signage within, again, going back to moral and ethical, within limits of their own moral and ethical beliefs that don't interfere with the residents, but yet continue to allow them to grow their businesses.
And how does that relate to your value about property rights?
Well, it all ties together, right? I mean, if I'm a business owner and I build a location and I spend an exorbitant amount of money in my own personal savings to start and create this business, or even just move a business out here into this community, I want to be able to grow my business to benefit my family, my heirs, maybe even the community. I mean, a lot of these businesses that are here that we're talking about are the ones that are giving back to the basketball teams and the football teams and the bands and the other the church organizations where people need help, right? And so why would we upset those people that are actually willing to give back to the community that they're doing business in?
Right, and I would suggest that even sales tax revenue and property tax on commercial properties are by nature giving back to the citizens, because the more properties that you have that are chipping into property taxes, you're defraying the potential of the necessary increase of property taxes that will happen by the increased demand and usage on city infrastructure and city resources. So to me, all across America, it's commercial development and business development, and especially businesses that bring in sales tax revenue, that have incredible benefits to us, to the citizens. But I think that we don't often realize how important business development is for the benefit of a city, or for the citizens specifically. What are your thoughts about that?
That's right. And for a long time, the city of Liberty Hill, and I believe the city limits is only 2.5 square miles, right? So it's relatively small. But the whole time I was growing up here, there were 700, 800, 900 people that lived in the city of Liberty Hill, and there were thousands of people that lived around the city of Liberty Hill. And so that, they all came into town to buy gas and supplies and things from the businesses in town, eat at the restaurants, right? And that's how it is today. The city limits of Liberty Hill is relatively small, but it has a larger impact on the residents that live around town. There are thousands upon thousands of people that live outside the city limits that are all impacted by everything the city of Liberty Hill does. But not only are they impacted, they're the ones that are eating at the restaurants and buying from the mom and pop boutiques and getting their haircut at the salons. And so it's important for the residents in the town and the city who's governing, making these laws, to respect the people that live outside of the city limits, because really that's the majority of the people that live here.
Absolutely. Now, another interesting thought, in my opinion, is, sometimes I would go down the weeds thinking about moral and religious implications of things, right? But I think you started by talking about moral implications of things, and obviously as a pastor, one of the thoughts that I think about often is Scripture says you'll have one law for you and for the stranger in your land. And there's this kind of idea that law is meant to apply to everybody pretty much equally. I mean, there can be some few exceptions, for reasonable causes that I think you would really have to wrestle with. One of the interesting things about the electronic message display ordinance is that they're looking, at least from what has been audibly expressed to some of our business owners, they're looking to eventually eliminate all electronic message displays from the city of Liberty Hill, except for the public schools. Mm-hmm. Public schools can still get them permitted and can still continue to repair them, even if it costs more than 50% of the cost of repairs. And in my mind, that's really the city saying, hey, these public schools have a higher value, and it's more important for them to use these electronic message displays than for businesses. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, let's be realistic. The school system, the ISD here, which I went to school K through 12 and graduated, has always been our largest employer. It's been our largest business in town. And so I think there's a very real need to get along with the ISD. The ISD is growing with leaps and bounds, and they will continue to be the largest employer. So it's very important for the city and the Liberty Hill Independent School District to get along and walk this path hand in hand. They don't need to be fighting, or there doesn't need to be any division. I do think that it's unfair that the ISD is excluded from these rules and ordinances also, because, as I said earlier in the interview, I love seeing the Friday night lights, right? I mean, they've coined a term for it because it's so popular.
Yes.
And I agree that they need to be there. But that's really no different than any other entity or organization that wants to support the community that needs lighting at night or wants to be able to produce an event or an activity. And the city needs to work with all residents and business owners, similar to what they're doing with the ISD, in order to make this cohesive for everybody.
So if I understand you right, you think that the motivation that they get an exemption is because they employ so many people? Or do you think it's because in the mind of citizens, the schools are unique and special in a way that businesses aren't? What would you, I mean, we can't really tell, but what would be your thought?
Yeah, I don't know what the motivation is. I do think schools are a different structure within themselves. I mean, it's a different government organization, technically. They really work outside the city limits bounds, yes. I mean, the ISD has its own police staff, right? And so they've got their own police departments that's different than the City of Liberty Hills Police Department. They have their own rules that they follow based on TEA guidelines. So I don't want to guess as to why there's been an exclusion allowed for the schools. I just think that the schools and the city need to work together, and anything the city enacts on behalf of its citizens should be even across the board, right? It shouldn't allow one group or organization to do more or less than any other group or organization.
Yeah, that's why I said it's speculation on my part as well. But I think when I'm talking about the first logic class I ever took. In the introduction, it said, whenever you see something or hear an argument, it's your moral responsibility to paint it in the best light possible, right? So applying that kind of principle, I like to think that the reason why there's a difference for the public schools is not because they're the biggest business in town and so they're able to get special benefits just because they're the bigger business. I like to think it's really because in the minds of the people, the schools are unique and special and valuable in a way that hasn't also been passed along to the way people see local business. And I think that's where I like to think the discrepancy is, yeah, we care, we do. Everybody should care about the schools, and I think education is a top priority. It's one of the most important things that happens in any nation is the education of our children. But at the same time, recently the schools just, we've got a proposal on the ballot to increase property tax for the schools. And, I think every citizen, every person wants to give the very best to kids. That's in our very heart. It's in the passion. I think it's in the very DNA of Liberty Hill. But one of the things that people often don't think about are the incredible alternative revenue streams that happen through business development, even to help the schools. By allowing businesses to attract, business that's going down Highway 29 or just growing commercially within the city limits, that also includes property taxes that are going to help the schools, even more than just the amount of revenue from property taxes that they're getting from residential buildings within the ISD. And I think that's one of the ideas that I'm really trying to hope that people will start to lay hold of, is the incredible benefit for the schools, for the citizens, of business and economic development within a city. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think whenever you break it down as the schools and the city and the residents, I think it doesn't need to be looked as any one of the three is parasitic on any of the other ones, right?
Right.
They all need to work together. And you're right. When the community has good parents and good families, then they have good school children who attend, right? The teachers are happy because they're not constantly disciplining. It makes the schools happy. When the schools bring in good schools, then it helps the people. And the government works in the same direction. They should all be working together to benefit and uplift the community. And whenever you see something that's lowering our standards or tearing away from what our fabric of beliefs, then we should all work together to lift that up. And so I think it's very important for Liberty Hill at this turning point in their growth cycle, right, as a city, that all three work together and create the best environment. Again, I keep going back to our kids because at my age now, I'm starting to look, at my kids and my grandkids because they're my future, right? And my future is not very long ahead of me. And so I start looking at what can we leave, what's the area going to be like when we're no longer here, and all three of those need to work together seamlessly to help make Liberty Hill the kind of community that we want it to be for years and years to come.
I also am intrigued because not only are you just a huge blessing to the city and really speak well at city council meetings and really care about bringing unity and getting people working together, but you also happen to be a very successful businessman, and you have a lot of relationships, even that extend, I believe, beyond the limits of Liberty Hill. And before we started recording this video, one of the things that I've been asking a lot of business owners and developers was because I heard people telling me that Liberty Hill has developed a reputation of not being very conducive to development into business development. Is that what you perceive as well?
Well, I appreciate the positive compliments. The city of Liberty Hill has always been a little problematic to deal with, and that's not anything new. I think there's always been a contingent of residents that live here that don't want to see it grow and expand. I think you get that in any small town. I think in Liberty Hill there's been more resistance to growth. But unfortunately, the growth is coming. You know, when I grew up here, as a kid, Seward Junction was a blinking light, and it was a spaghetti mess of roads. And now it's about to be a major interstate thoroughfare. So the people that, you know, when I grew up here, when my parents moved here to have the nice country lifestyle in a community that they could afford to live in, that's completely changed from what it is today. And so we as residents and business owners, again, should strive to make this a better community for the future generations than it has been. It was always a great place. I wouldn't have wanted to grow up anywhere else. And I've had tremendous success here, and I've been very appreciative of all that. I think that in all my business endeavors in Liberty Hill, I've tried to create a positive growth. You know, I can look back at all the stuff I've built and thought it looks better now than it did when I bought it or, you know, took control of it. This is still a wonderful area. This is where I want to be raising my kids. And, you know, my mom and my mother-in-law, my father-in-law live here, and we still believe it's a fantastic community. No place else I'd rather be.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I try to break it down in my mind, because a lot of this, if I'm being honest, is new to me. You know, I just, you know, was pastoring the church, and you just think about Liberty Hill and you think, well, you know, it's a place that has really great values, really great people. I always operate with the assumption that everybody who's involved in, you know, the city council or in the government at large, they're all just good people like Liberty Hill, and so I just know that they're doing the right thing. And I've come to the conclusion that myself as well, I had kind of not engaged as much as I probably should have as I started to talk to different people and business owners and starting to learn a lot of what's going on. And I think that what it is that there's just not enough communication going on. Mm-hmm. I think that most people get on city council and they want to be a blessing to the city and a blessing to the citizens, and everybody's operating with the sincere and right intention to do what is good and what is helpful and in the best interest of the city. But when you start to look under the hood, you really realize that, well, there are things that we need to talk about because, like you said, a lot of the citizens that moved here, they wanted a country life. And growth has been forced on them. And the natural response is to want to try to hinder that as much as possible because we don't want to lose what we have that is wonderful and beautiful that makes Liberty Hill special. But then when you take a step back and look at it practically and really try to analyze it, you realize what will happen, in my mind, if we don't create those other revenue streams. Those old-time Liberty Hill residents, their few properties are going to become what is driving supporting the local government unless we are intentional about bringing in these other revenue streams. And in that process, I think that people really need to think about and talk about what do we want to do to make Liberty Hill unique? What do we want to do to keep Liberty Hill special? I think that one of the things that I like about a small town is that people can be personable, that people can still be governed by common sense, or they can still do things that they know is right and figure out how to work that into the system in a way that makes people feel like you're dealing with human beings. But I think that when people don't analyze what we're doing, because this is just the way it's done, you know, then they start building more and more ordinances like we're looking at, and they don't realize that there's more red tape that comes along with that things become less and less personable. Every time you add layers of bureaucracy, you're creating a less personal environment, you know, and even ideas like this, I think that we need to be talking about if we want to keep Liberty Hill special, maybe even doing something that is unique to be able to figure out how to create the kind of growth, economic growth and development, you know, really make it beautiful, make it a place for families, make it a place for children, developing parks, developing, you know, trails, you know, all the things that attract visitors to Liberty Hill, but without losing that value system, that moral and ethical, I think, element that I think a lot of Liberty Hill citizens really appreciate. What are your thoughts?
So I think I'm in a very unique position in that I have known every mayor and almost every city council member that served from 1999 to now personally. Not all of them,
Right.
but almost all of them. I've known every mayor personally. And I think those leaders have all gone into those positions when they were elected with the hope and desire to make Liberty Hill a better place, right? And they did it with a great heart and a sense of gratitude from where they came from, and a sense of wanting to accomplish something to better the community whenever they left. And I look at my mom, and I'm very, very thrilled and happy with her success as mayor. She did everything from a loving heart, and I always tell people, if you want my mom to agree with something, then you need to make sure that it benefits her grandkids, because that's the truth. She wants Liberty Hill to be better for her grandkids and the other kids in the community. I think along the way, the city of Liberty Hill has hired a lot of consultants that have given bad advice. That's no fault of the city council members or the mayors, but we, and I say we, the leaders of the community who are not going anywhere need to do a better job at communicating with the city council members and the mayor to let them know when their consulting engineers or consultants are doing a poor job for the city. And I feel like I've been a voice in that for quite some time now. And there's a lot of rules and regulations that are being passed that aren't beneficial, that aren't designed for a city of our size that are growing. They take ordinances from other places and manipulate them and adopt them into our city government structure, which is fine, but we have to be very careful that we aren't trying to emulate some of these larger cities that we don't want to become. Liberty Hill is not Austin, and I don't want it to become Austin, and I never want it to become Austin or Round Rock or Pflugerville. It's very unique, and we need to continue to let it grow, and in my opinion means less government regulation. Biblically, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, at that point there were always new commandments and new laws that were added onto it. And you could see that at some point the Jewish people just couldn't follow all those laws anymore. There were just too many. It was too intrusive in their lives. That's what happens in city government whenever we continue to write new laws constantly and we don't follow the ones that we've already adopted. We continually get to a point where we can't follow all the laws. We don't know all the regulations. It takes more city staff and more administration to try to make sure the citizens and the residents are reined back in. And that's not what Liberty Hill needs to become. We need to become a community that's based on principles of moral principles, ethical principles of loving our neighbor and allowing our businesses to flourish at the same time.
Yeah, you actually brought up something that I actually think is very interesting to me. In my opinion, anyway, the city council members, sure, they get a little paycheck, but they work so much more than what that little paycheck is worth. And they're not full-time employees of the city, and yet they work really, really hard. But there is a limited time. Everything that goes across their table is demanding of their time. And so when there are ordinances that are passing their table that are, like you're mentioning, may not be helpful, they're not only costing time and enforcement once they get passed, but they're also costing the time of our city council members that could be discovering, like from people like you and from other business owners and from other people in the community, what is it like doing business in Liberty Hill? What is it like developing in Liberty Hill and figuring out how to streamline that process, right? I mean, this is one of the proposals that I have for the Liberty Hill Voters Association that's starting that, we haven't developed a platform yet, but I'm working on kind of like a template of maybe things that we can discuss, and one of them would be to make Liberty Hill more attractive to business development and commercial development than surrounding cities. Like that would be the big picture. Well, how would you do that? Well, you talk to them. What was your experience? How do we streamline that experience? How do we prioritize things in a way that makes it more human and less red tape?
That's right.
Right? And so even if I go back to those dark skies ordinances, one of the concerns that I have is looking at how comprehensive even just the residential ordinances are, right? I mean, I'm not going to mention anything that I might be even seeing around Liberty Hill today. But let's just say I've seen a number of properties within the ETJ that are clearly not in compliance. And if I was a betting man, I would bet there are a lot of homes in the ETJ that are not in compliance. Now, well, if it's fair and just, well then so the city will send, code enforcement around to every house and do an analysis and make sure that every house is equally brought into compliance, right? And then, well, the city says, well, we can't afford that, so we're going to maybe charge a fee to everybody so that they're paying for that compliance review. But practically, that would be political suicide. So in my mind, the most logical expectation that I have for the future is the ordinances are in law, and they are in law. I think it's until 2027 that all the residences have to be brought into compliance. What will practically happen is it's a neighbor who happens to know the law who decides that he maybe has a beef with his other neighbor and says, I can see he's out of compliance, I'm going to report him. And so the houses that will get have to deal with this are probably going to be arbitrary and not consistent and uniform. At least that's how my mind sees it playing out. What are your thoughts?
Well, so here's a unique answer to your question. Maybe it's not unique, but I've been here for a long time, right?
Yeah.
The city was founded in 1999. I've been to a lot of planning and zoning meetings, city council meetings, different meetings, organizations, committees.
Yeah.
And city council members always come and go. Staff always come and go. I sit here today in the same town that I've been in since before the city was founded, right? And I think the city needs to be very careful on creating rules and ordinances that are going to remain in effect for very, very many years of time, right? After they're not in their positions anymore, and other people are going to have to deal with that. Now, if you sit down as any person in the city and think about what are these rules that we're creating and how does it really benefit the future generations that are going to come behind me, well then I think you would start realizing that a lot of the stuff that you're trying to pass isn't really necessary, because it may be passionate for you, but is it passionate for your neighbor? That's a question they have to ask themselves. And everyone that serves on the city council or the mayoral position does it with a passion. You wouldn't be there, like you said, they don't make any money. They wouldn't be doing it if they didn't have a passion and a desire to create change. But is that change really beneficial for future generations? I think it's a real hard step back to say, okay, what I'm passing today is really going to be beneficial. And I really don't think the dark sky ordinances are going to be beneficial for our future generations. Now, there's going to be people that argue with me on that, but I really can't see any benefit. I've heard people tell me the reasons why, but it's not making our schools better. It's not bringing more businesses into town. It's not changing the residential structure of the people that come here. They don't go, oh my goodness, I'm coming to Liberty Hill now because they have a dark sky ordinance. It's not creating more tax revenue. I mean, there's nothing that I see that is beneficial from this dark sky ordinance other than, like you said, it's going to pit neighbor against neighbor, and he said, she said, on things that really don't matter in your day-to-day life. I mean, again, if your neighbor is shining a floodlight through your window, that's a problem.
Right.
But if your neighbor is lighting up their driveway because they are concerned about safety and security, well then they should be able to do that. That should be their right as a property owner. So I think really the government, not only the people that are in city council and the mayors, but also the consultants that the city hires, needs to look at what is this really benefiting the city of Liberty Hill, not any other city, not any other town, the city of Liberty Hill, and what impact is this going to have on future generations.
I want to thank you, John, for taking this time to speak with me and have a conversation. I really believe that a lot of what you said is going to be really helpful to Liberty Hill citizens, and as kind of we were mentioning as we were kind of off camera a second ago, that I think that you mentioned some things that make me convinced that you actually have a lot of information from being here for so long and being involved at the level that you have of how we could help Liberty Hill not become Austin, not become Round Rock, to really simplify our ordinances and our code to be a blessing to our children and our children's children, and really provide a wonderful city for posterity, a place to call home for many generations. And I think that's really what you're committed to, and obviously your mom was committed to that, and really appreciate all that she's done for our city. And I just want to encourage all of you who have chosen to continue watching to this point in the video. I want to thank you for watching these long form videos. And I just want to encourage you to get involved with the Liberty Hill Voters Association. You can find us at facebook.com/LHvoter, or you can email me at bill.brannan@libertieshill.com. I just want to ask you to really consider reaching out and being involved. Our hope is to have more and more conversations with people in the community so that more people understand what's going on, so that we could have the kind of conversations with people like John and pick his brain, and maybe even pick the brain of other people from other cities that helped their cities develop in a really healthy way that could benefit the city of Liberty Hill. But I think that more citizens getting involved, more citizens getting informed will just be a blessing and a help to the city, and will help provide a better future for our children and our grandchildren. So thank you again for watching.